At 72, Christie Brinkley finally revealed what Peter Cook did that made divorce inevitable. There was a man standing in the crowd that day, a father, a police officer from Southampton. He walked up to Christie Brinkley, leaned in close, and told her that her husband had been sleeping with his 18-year-old daughter. She was 52 years old. She had given that man a family, a home, a life she believed in, and she learned it was all a lie, the way you learn a stranger's terrible news. In public, from someone she had never met. Now, I want you to hold on to one thing before we go further. Almost 20 years after that afternoon, at 72, Christie Brinkley finally sat down and told the world what really happened inside that marriage. And the part that stayed with me the most is not what Peter Cook did to her. It is what she decided to do in return. I will get to it. She had spent years bracing for heartbreak, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always the woman everyone watched. But with Peter, she let herself believe she had finally found the one person who would never make her the headline. She stopped bracing, and that was the risk she took when she married him in 1996. She had a daughter with him, Sailor. Peter adopted her young son, Jack, and raised him as his own. For 10 years, she believed it had worked. She had her children, her homes out in the Hamptons, a husband she trusted with the one thing she guarded most, which was the safety of her kids. And here is what makes the betrayal so devastating. She found out on one of the proudest days of her year, standing at a podium, talking about hope. I need to stop here, because what she did next is the part almost no one really understood at the time. She did not scream, she did not collapse. She turned, found her son Jack in the crowd, and saw his face frozen in panic. And very quietly, she told him, "Mommy needs to go to the police station." Then she went home, and with a couple of trusted friends beside her, she sat down at the family computer and started looking. What she found was not one mistake, it was a life. In her own words, a creepy labyrinth of files and photos she never knew existed. Accounts, images, a whole secret world running underneath the marriage she thought was solid. It came up on the screen, she wrote, like fireworks. This was not a man who slipped once and felt ashamed. Court testimony later laid it out plainly. He had been a paying member of an adult affair website. At one point, he was spending as much as $3,000 a month on escort services and pornography. The 18-year-old was not the whole story. She was the piece that got exposed. Christie sat there and understood something that takes most people years to accept. The affair was not the betrayal. The affair was just the part that finally became visible. If you have ever loved someone and slowly realized that the person you defended, the person you built a life around, had a whole self you were never allowed to see, you understand what she felt in that room. It was not only anger, it was a kind of vertigo. The ground you have been standing on for 10 years turns out to have been painted over a hole. There is something deeply disorienting about discovering that the person you trusted most was living two separate lives. One with you, one you were never supposed to see. And the hardest question becomes, which version was real? The man who adopted your son and raised him as his own? Or the man who built a secret world of accounts and payments and lies? The hardest part of a betrayal like that is not the other person. It is the rewriting. Suddenly, every ordinary evening, every quiet family dinner, every time he said, "I love you," has to be re-examined. You start to wonder what was real. And a woman who has already survived heartbreak, who thought she had finally chosen safely, has to sit with the fact that she chose this. That is not weakness. That is just what it costs to love someone completely. So here is where a lot of women in Christie's position would have made a very human choice. Take the settlement, sign the papers, protect the children from the noise, and disappear quietly. And honestly, given who she was and how the cameras followed her, no one would have blamed her for wanting it over fast. But that is not what happened, because the person standing across from her had other plans, and that is when she made a choice most women in her position would not have made. This reminds me of something we talked about in our video on Maria Shriver, another woman who did not learn the truth from her husband, but from the outside world after decades of loyalty. Different marriage, different secret, same devastating pattern. The wife is always the last to know, and somehow she is the one expected to hold it together for everyone else. If you have not seen that one, I will leave it for you at the end. But the story does not end there. What most people remember is the affair. What they forget is what Peter Cook did after he was caught. Because that, more than anything, is what made this divorce impossible to walk away from quietly. He did not let her go. He fought for years. What could have been a private, dignified ending instead became a 6-year court battle that the tabloids treated like entertainment. Every lurid detail dragged into open court. And the man at the center of it had already tried to make part of it disappear. He had quietly handed the 18-year-old Diana Bianchi a payment of $300,000. Reporting at the time framed it as an attempt to keep the situation contained. Sit with that. He had the money and the instinct to try to manage the scandal. What he did not have was the decency to spare the mother of his children a public trial. That is the real answer to the question everyone was asking. It was not the affair alone that made the divorce inevitable. Plenty of marriages survive an affair. What made it inevitable was the discovery that the man she trusted with her children would rather burn it all down in public than let her leave with her dignity intact. A lot of women watching understand that instinctively. It is one thing to be hurt by someone. It is another thing entirely to watch them choose, again and again, to hurt you further, when walking away kindly was right there. So, let me take you into what those years actually cost her, because the headlines never captured it. While the trial went on, Christie was not a tabloid character. She was a mother. She was getting her kids to school. She was trying to keep her daughter and her son from reading the worst things ever written about their father. She sat in a courtroom and listened to testimony about escort sites and affairs and payments, and she had to hold her face together while strangers wrote about her marriage like it was a soap opera. She was in her 50s. She had already given the public decades of her private life, and now the most humiliating chapter of it was being read aloud, line by line, for anyone who wanted to watch. There were many times, she later admitted, when she wondered if she would ever recover, and the testimony itself was brutal. Day after day, the details of Peter's secret life were read into the record for the public to feast on. That he had been a gold member of an adult affair website, that he had spent thousands on escorts and pornography in the home where their children lived, that the affair with the teenager had happened not only at his office, but inside the very homes Christie had built for their family. None of it was whispered. All of it was public, sworn, and printed the next morning. At one point in that courtroom, she turned to face him directly, in tears, and asked the only question that ever really mattered. How could you? When the settlement finally came, hammered out in all-night negotiations that ended around 6 in the morning, she walked away with what she had truly been fighting for. Full custody of her children. She kept the family homes. He walked away with a check and limited time with the kids he had fought so hard and so publicly to keep. She walked away with everything that had ever actually mattered to her. And if you know anything about what she valued most, you know exactly who won that morning. I told you at the start, there was one thing she did that surprised me more than anything Peter Cook ever did. This is it. When it was over, when she had every reason in the world to be bitter, Christie Brinkley did something almost no one in her position does. She thought about the 18-year-old, the girl her husband had used. And in front of reporters, she said this: "I cannot help but think of Diana Bianchi. I want her and her family to know that I feel for her. I forgive her. She was manipulated. Think about who that girl was to her. The face of the worst betrayal of her life." And Christie looked past her own pain long enough to see a teenager who had been taken advantage of by a grown man. She did not aim her anger at the easiest target. She aimed her clarity at the person who actually deserved it. That is not weakness. That is a woman who refused to let what was done to her turn her into something smaller. And then she did the last thing. She waited. She raised her children. And at 71, she finally wrote it all down in her own memoir, in her own words, and called that marriage the most tortured relationship she ever had. She said that recording the audiobook was so hard, there were parts where she had to tell herself, "Please do not cry." But she read every word of it anyway, in her own voice. And now, at 72, she is doing something even her memoir did not do. She is living proof that the story does not end with the pain. That is the part that matters most for anyone who has lived through something like this. For years, the world got to narrate Christie Brinkley's heartbreak. The lawyers narrated it, the tabloids narrated it, the court transcripts narrated it. Everyone got a turn except her. So when she finally picked up the pen and told the whole thing herself, she was not chasing revenge. She was taking back the one thing that had been stolen from her at that podium all those years ago: the right to tell her own story. And there is something quietly powerful about a woman who waits, who carries it with grace, and then, when she is good and ready, says it in her own voice. She survived the man who tried to break her in public. She raised the children he fought her for, and she gave a frightened teenager the forgiveness that no one ever thought to give her. At 72, Christie Brinkley is not the woman that stranger pitied at a graduation ceremony in 2006. She is not defined by what was done to her in that marriage. She is the one still standing, still smiling, still telling her own story, with the whole truth finally on her side. And if her story stayed with you, there is another woman we covered who was publicly humiliated by a man's affair and rebuilt her life into something even bigger. Sandra Bullock walked a road a lot like this one, and what she did afterward is genuinely worth your time. I will have it waiting for you right here at the end.